So let's begin kind of reviewing the foundational principles which come from the Book of Certitude that I've been using throughout the lecture series to help explain both the similarities and differences between religion. The first and most important principle is the principle of progressive revelation. Now, progressive revelation has two parts to it. First part is that there is a sequence of revelations, meaning in time. It's a historical process. And the second part of progressive revelation is that it brings the teachings in each revelation that are required for the advancement of humanity. This graph is a very simplistic illustration of why the swings of humanity. You'll see at the time that Adam came, humanity was in requirement of a new revelation. It was at its low point. It would make no sense for a manifestation to come at its high point. And through those teachings and the release of forces, whether conscious or subconscious, civilization is created. Why? How does civilization advance by religion? It's very simple, my friends. It's so simple. In order to create civilization, you need to create wealth. In order to create wealth, people have to give more than they take. In order for people to give more than they take, they must have the greater good at heart. They must be selfless. It's so simple. And when they reach the peak, they begin to forget how they got there. They begin to lose the content of their religion. What is content? It is those understandings deep within your heart that cause you to transform. You see, when you learn human knowledge, you get facts and ideas. But when you receive divine knowledge, you receive an energy latent within that knowledge for change. How do you tell a true prophet from a false prophet? Christ was asked, by their fruits. If not only the fruits of the messenger, but also watch what happens to the people when they follow these commandments. They're changed. They become a new race. When Moses spent 40 years preparing the Jewish and Egyptians who followed him to become a new race. Race not meaning black, white, that kind of race, but a new level of maturity. So by the time the Hebrew people came into Israel, they weren't the same people that left Egypt. They were the return of the people of every revelation who are transformed by the teachings. You shall know them by their fruits. And so civilization begins to decline when that creative force no longer is present. And by its nature, Aristotle said, humanity declines, because its nature becomes stronger than the creative forces that allow us to escape our nature. And you'll find coincidentally, or perhaps not so coincidentally, that humanity begins to take more than they give. And when you start to take more from your bank account than you put in, guess what? It declines. This is not rocket science, my friends. And as each revelation passes, the capacity of humanity increases. This is the process of evolution. Because human beings have yet to discover what their true capacity is. It requires a creative, active agent to release within us our creative forces. All the things we're discovering now are a result of the forces released by the most recent revelation. Baha'u'llah has released forces to open up all of the healing arts. It's just that most people aren't aware of the source. So as this capacity increases, the potential for good increases. Good, what is good? The Greeks define good, synonymous with God, as truths, as those content. Good is content, the Word of God. It is what we're capable of understanding and translating into action. That's what good means. Translating truth into action. The purpose of philosophy is to discover truth and translate it into action. But we also have a capacity to fall greater, because capacity is simply like a gallon container. It can contain a gallon of nourishing fluid or poison. So our capacity increases for evil, which is counter good, which means we don't or have forgotten knowledge or truth, and we fall back to our nature. At some point, the capacity for evil becomes so great that it threatens the existence of humanity. We are at that stage of history. This is why every religious cycle, and there have been many before this Adam. In Islam, there have been 1,000 Adams. This is why there is a universal manifestation who comes like Baha'u'llah. Humanity could no longer afford, with this growing capacity, to fall back to its lowest depths. We are now simply sampling the potential of destruction. My friends, if we were to receive the full force of our capacity for destruction, not a single soul would survive, not a single plant would survive, not a single animal would be alive. At some point, as Plato said, the king must return to take hold the reins of the empire. So God's in charge, my friends. You better believe it. Been in charge all along, but now more evident than ever before, because the consequences are more severe now. The question is, how much longer must we suffer before we get it? How much longer must we commit the ignorance of the old world before we can taste the delights of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven? It's ours to determine. It is up to us. So, the second principle. Now, I must repeat this, of course. After Baha'u'llah, they will continue for the next 500,000 years Revelation will continue with new messengers coming. But to complete this cycle, they will come under the shadow of Baha'u'llah, as all the previous messengers came under the shadow of Adam. Adam was the age of prophecy. Baha'u'llah brings the age of fulfillment. My friends, it's like life. Most of your life is spent in adulthood. It's not spent in teenage years or childhood. You're given many years to practice adulthood. Most people wait to the very end. But we're given 500,000 years to practice being adults. I can guarantee you that even 300 years from now, we are not going to be able to imagine the potential of humanity. So great will it be. Can you imagine 500,000 years from now? No, sir. Now, the next principle is the requirement of these messengers to come. I think that is evident from our lectures, that humanity left to its own devices can at best simply regurgitate what was brought to them by these messengers, find maybe new ways of expressing it. Someone asked me if we were creators, only in a very limited sense. True creation is bringing new beings into existence. What we are channels of change. We bring ideas that already exist in the spiritual realm into physical reality. My friends, when the animals look at us, we are gods. And what we will become in the future, compared to what we are now, will be godlike. It's all relative. But we need these messengers as mediators to connect our hearts to divine knowledge, to content, to the metaphysical realm. What are we to do with this knowledge? We are to translate it into change. Religion is change. When it ceases to be change, it ceases to be a living religion. This is what Christ meant. I shall raise the dead. I shall bring you from your dead religion to a living religion. By releasing new forces, new understanding. And finally, we discover these new messengers through the independent investigation of truth, which requires us each to be scientists, spiritual scientists. We need to search or research the truth. You see, I have many friends, they come up to me, they say, Ron, sometimes they say, Dr. Ron, you're a scientist, you can do this stuff. I'm just an average person, I can't do science. No, my friends, that's a cop-out. We are all created to be scientists. We are all given the responsibility of discovering truth for ourselves. We're not talking about the genetic codes here. We're talking about the recognition of the source of truth and the laws and principles that are applicable to the day we live in. So we can benefit from them, we can grow and develop. Because evolution for humanity requires not only the active agent of a messenger of God, but requires our volition to act on it. The independent investigation of truth is not dependent on your formal education. If it were, then most of the peoples of the world would be left out of this process. Baha'u'llah says that innate within every individual is the ability to determine truth from falsehood. Not the sophisticated, complex truths of biochemistry, but the truth of whether a messenger of God is speaking from the voice of God or not. The truth of whether the message he brings rings true to our hearts. Remember, it was a Peter who became the leader of the Christian movement after Christ, a man who could neither read nor write nor even count to 7. It's called the egalitarian principle. It is what I understand is the true meaning of equality. We all have the ability to recognize the truth. However, if we blindly abide by the truth as recognized by our parents or friends or peers, co-workers, neighbors, family, then we have forfeited our responsibility. You see, when we go to the next world and we say to whoever interviews us there, I did not recognize the messenger of God for the day we live in because my parents did not recognize him. And the response may go like this: what other lame excuses do you have? So I'd like to summarize the whole lecture series by a chart. I broke it down this way many years ago, and every time I think about changing it, I can only change a few words here and there. Probably this course is becoming dogma, which is by its nature will become that. I think it serves, so I want to share it with you. Before Adam, perhaps we had messengers who were seen, who brought the image of God as the mother, because we were at the infant stage of our development. By infant stage, meaning that we had dependence on God, reliance on God. Our main social identity was the self, as an infant has. They basically are occupied with their survival. The mathematics begins in the embryo. The baby starts noticing it has toes. Now, it doesn't count its toes unless it's an extraordinary fetus, but it does recognize the individuality of its toes and its fingers, and chooses some over others to put in its mouth. And in terms of science, at the infant stage, mankind was in total wonderment of nature and fear, so that when lightning came, it must have been from God. And they would hide under a rock or a tree. Probably not a tree if it's lightning. And then another stage of childhood, the childhood stage, from Adam to Jesus, developing from the young child to the older child. And there the image of God became the Father. You see, the image is evolving. The stage of maturity was the child stage, as we mentioned. The means of growth was brought by Adam in Genesis 2, moral choices. And that would develop to higher and higher levels, so that by the time of Christ, it would develop at a very high level. The social identity moved from the self to the family on to the city-state. Each one of increasing complexity, each one offering a greater opportunity for expression of capacity. Mathematics moved from additions, which we now think began with Adam, and the most early civilizations knew how to do additions, to geometry of the Greeks by the time of Christ, the most advanced mathematics during this period. And then after Jesus came Muhammad, which I separate as a separate stage of maturity, the adolescent stage, where the image of Father or the God is seen as the friend, no longer the Father image of authority that can punish with the grievous afflictions, but now a closer companion, the friend. The means of growth went beyond morality to a new understanding of the free will, which is required for morality. And that is submission of my will to the will of God. And the social identity moved to the most complex unit so far, the nation state. We talked about that. Requiring universal ethical systems, requiring new institutions, requiring an abolition of all forms of prejudice. And then we move on to mathematics, which now reflect that higher state of understanding, algebra, the expression of principle rather than detail. And then that moved to calculus, which is the highest stage of additions. You see, if you're mathematics and teaching mathematics, you know that calculus is just the highest form of additions, called integration. The integral is a way of adding infinitesimals. See? And then from Muhammad to Baha'u'llah, Bab and Baha'u'llah, which bring the latest stage, where now the image of God is the lover. In prior dispensation, it was man who went after God. Baha'u'llah says in this day, God seeks out his beloved man. It is God who comes after us and pleads with us to have a love affair on the spiritual plane. My friends, I like to call this the age of the lover. You see, we haven't yet discovered what it means to be a lover. We're just playing with it a little bit. We don't know what the love of a marriage will be in the future. It will not be what it is today. We don't know what brotherhood means. We have inklings of it. The only real purpose of the Baha'i communities today is to begin to experiment and to begin to model what these things might look like. Not as the end all, but as a process of workshops to begin to implement these new teachings. That's what Baha'i community, that's why one would become a Baha'i. Not just to bask in your glory that you've recognized Baha'u'llah, but to roll up your sleeves and to begin to practice those teachings. The social identity has moved to world citizen. Within all the complete diversity of humanity, all the cultures, the races, the ethnicities, the different viewpoints, not just of national groups, but of individuals. You see, those two triangles, one was greater unity, but what was greater unity expressed? As infinite diversity. It is unity that allows us to be ourselves. Not unity based on looking alike, on thinking alike, but unity based on content that releases us from the chains and imprisonment of the old ways of thinking. If religion doesn't create freedom, it is not from God. But it creates freedom through submission. See, in the boardrooms of Enron, that's a hard concept. And in mathematics, I asked my Baha'i friend, who is a professor of mathematics at OSU, how many different mathematics have been discovered since Baha'u'llah? He says he doesn't know. He doesn't think there's any professor in the department who can tell you. Because each day, new mathematics are being created in the journals. It's increasing beyond the ability to keep up with it. In science, we're now discovering that science is plagued with dogma like religion has been plagued with dogma. People are holding on to the old ways of thinking. And that the only way to describe the new science that Baha'u'llah has brought, there's only one thing I can. I've thought about it over and over again. I had to come up with simply unfettered search for truth, with the emphasis on unfettered. Seeking truth without personal gain. Seeking truth without political correctness. Seeking truth that may be opposed to the way the majority of scientists believe. My friends, it's a great day you live in. Congratulations. Thank you so much. Actually, we find in the Baha'i writings there have been innumerable messengers that have come to every people. No people have been bereft of guidance. No people. No matter how isolated they were, no matter how primitive they were all given spiritual guidance throughout history. Why is mathematics one of the categories I include on that chart? Because it is that expression of the eternal that was recognized already by the Greeks 1,000 years before Christ. And mathematics is one of the great arts of civilization. It is one of the great processes of civilization. If we did not have math, my friends, I could not be talking to you, because they would not have been able to design the automobile. And I would be stuck in Corvallis, or God knows where. You see, That is the practical side of math. What I tried to show you was some of the insights that we can get from math. I tried to bring you back maybe to what the Greeks were doing to understand math. We need to teach math differently. We need to teach it as one of those natural things that all of us can master. You know, I'm afraid to say that much of what we are teaching today is to keep people ignorant, is to make it so difficult that only a select few can understand. That has to do with the old way of thinking that was centered around the concept of privilege. You know, Baha'u'llah has come to abolish privilege. And you see, this is a hard one. Even for us Americans, it's hard to give up privilege. You see, if you believe otherwise, simply discuss with your neighbor or friend why we should open up our borders to all the peoples of the world. And they say, because they weren't born here. It is our privilege because we were born here. Well, I didn't do anything to deserve my birth. It's not through my efforts that I was born. So why should I have that privilege? See, there is no logical argument for boundaries between nations. There's a practical issue. I have to give up my privileges. How can you have world justice if you have a privileged class and an unprivileged class? How can you have world peace when you have some nations who are denied technology and other nations where it's promoted? You know, one of the things that happened to me after I became a Baha'i was I was moved to change my field in my profession from theoretical mathematics and physics and optics over to practical things. And the first thing that I did was to develop the camera system that makes computer chips. We sold those to Intel. But our original purpose for designing that in our startup in Silicon Valley was not to design a system that would promote privilege, but we actually designed that first camera so it could be operated in the communes of China as easily as in the clean houses of Silicon Valley. When we first showed it at the trade show, the people came by and say, we don't understand why you designed it this way. We said we designed it so that all countries, regardless of their economics, could participate in this technology. They said, what a ridiculous idea that is. Within 3 years, that camera, which cost a little over $100,000, became $2 million and excluded the ability to be purchased by any but the richest countries. Because the concept of privilege is so ingrained in us. The Baha'u'llah has come to abolish privilege. And therefore, his teachings will meet resistance of those who don't want to abolish privilege. Well, I think, see, the term taking things out of context simply refers of taking something that was meant for that particular set of circumstances, time and place, and trying to apply it to some other condition. In other words, a better way of saying taking it out of context in the lingo that I'm trying to develop for myself is to be trying to make context content. You know, one of the beauties of this phraseology that I like is that I like systems and I like vocabulary that helps me think clear, is that if you want to understand fundamentalism, the first thing you need is a piece of chalk. There, it's over here. Okay, see. One definition of fundamentalism, I love this. Okay, you know, in my notes, when I want to give a definition, I said it's equal to. Is making context content. That is forgetting the principle. You don't have principle. Why do you think there's fundamentalism, my friends? The people have forgotten the content of their religion. So now what they do, they try to elevate the context, which is only for time and place, and try to make it a universal principle. All people must wear a veil. That was context. Now they make it a universal law. You see, fundamentalism is stuck in the here and now, and they try to transcend the here and now by making the here and now the eternal realm. If you understand that, then you can go back through time and look at all the religious movements that occur before a new messenger comes, and you'll see the same thing. They elevate the contingent to the eternal. Okay, originally, what was the reason that women wore the veil? They went to Muhammad. They said, protect us from these gazes that men give us. If we're to be pure and to ascend to heaven, we need some kind of protection. Muhammad said, you have two choices. We kill all the men, or we give you the veil. See, back then, there's a problem with the first choice. You'd have a different speaker for one. But back then, it was different than now. The men looked at women as sex objects back then. So the veil was a way that women could walk. See, they're developing their equality. See, we got to think. So they don't, instead of being separated from men in all circumstances because men look at them with a sexual interest, they now, with the veil, can cover themselves and participate with men. You see, but that was the context. What was the principle? What was the context? Equality of men and women. That's the principle, but that was forgotten. And now the veil becomes the eternal principle. Thou shalt always wear the veil, except when you're with your husband. Okay. What you've got to remember is that what we call content today will be context tomorrow. Why? Because we're evolving. We're reaching higher levels of abstraction and generalization. Our experiences are becoming more complex, therefore the content must be inclusive of that complexity. The same problem exists in science. What is the purpose of science? To disprove the existing theory. Why? Because the theory only applies to what we've experienced. As soon as we have a new experience, we've got to change the theory. See, the scientist is looking for the universal laws of the universe. Never-ending process, see? All you do is keep changing the theories to accommodate a greater sphere of experience. Religion does the same thing. Our understanding of its content simply encloses the experiences we've had, which become more and more complex, ambiguous, and uncertain. So we now, instead of trying to define content as something you put your arms around, it becomes something more beyond, inclusive of our experiences. You see? And so, let me see if I can finish this. It's a difficult subject. So, it's my understanding that in evolution, the content of yesterday becomes the context of tomorrow. And that the new content a new content is brought into our understanding, which becomes the context after that. It's relativity. It's evolution. So if somebody says, I will define to you the content of something, see, you've got to be very suspicious. See? Christ said, what is the law? We don't know what the law is. We know what the laws are. But the law is evolving. Our understanding of it evolves. It doesn't change. There's only been one law since the beginning of time. But our understanding of it, how we apply it, changes. Bab and Baha'u'llah, some answered questions. He said it is the combination of elements that determines what spirit is attracted to it. If the combination is of minerals, it attracts the mineral spirit. If the combination of plant, it attracts the plant spirit. And the humans, because of the combination of those ingredients, attract a soul to it. Now, having said that, you obviously can't clone people. Why? Because each one will attract an individual spirit. They may look alike, but they're different people. They're different, completely different. The looks are superficial anyway. Identical twins. They say, oh, identical twins, they must attract the same kind of soul. No, that's stupid. It's cultural, it's educational, it's experiential. There's certain tendencies. But does this mean cloning is good? I don't think so. The purpose of marriage is foremost procreation of those who will recognize the messenger of God.
Well, the clone can recognize them.
That's true. But God prefers the old-fashioned way. No. And I'm not here to argue. Now you say, well, what about all those women who can't have children? What about this? What about that? My friends, we live in a very sick age. In the future, Baha'u'llah says, we're not going to have these conditions. So we're trying to forecast. This is the problem of politics. Trying to say what we're going to need in the future based on our present condition. Why don't we just say our present condition isn't normal and deal with that, which would be a much healthier thing for us to do. I think we're both right on that. I think that the souls are different, no doubt. Because by the nature of the soul, it is unique. And without a soul, the body can't live. So it has to have a soul, and it has to be unique. So that's clear from the writings. What isn't clear is how much of this genetic similarity is good for diversity and expression of the human potential. That, I think, is the question. And also, is it not true that procreation, preferably, is done as an act of love? You see, I think that element too, that the soul comes into being as an act of love, has to have some effect on its development and growth, it seems to me. So, my friends, let's call it a day.